Welcome to episode 7 of the Shiny Things Improv podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Balakjian, and this is a place where I get to pick the brains of my favourite improvisers. Today's guest is Graham Dickson, star of the hit West End improv show Austentatious and founder of the Free Association, one of the two big improv schools in London. From the FA's artistic director to a successful writing and acting career to countless shows at Soho Theatre, Graham has far too many accolades to mention here. But most recently, he's been touring with Cool Story Bro to sell out audiences of up to 1,000 people. Graham has been such an inspiration to me and so many others. I was very excited to have him on, and he did not disappoint, with loads of fascinating and some quite profound things to say about improv. It really was everything I'd hoped it would be. Here's a taste of what's coming up.
Ultimately, I do just think everyone just needs to find out what it is about them that is funny. You have to rely on your tools. You have to know what you do well. Like, I have 4 characters. I've had this sort of deep-rooted fear of communicating. When you learn to improvise, you're learning to write, and that's another one of the amazing things about improv. There have been many times where I've even been quite resentful towards improv and the FA. I don't know if I can share this, but I'm just going to anyway. It's a call to arms, especially to any very experienced improvisers listening. You're not good enough.
Graham Dickson, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. What a thrill and a treat to talk about improv, which I don't think is something I've ever done before.
You've been doing improv for how long?
Now I'm torn because I don't want people to know actually how old I am. No, I guess, started about 19 years ago. When I was 20, I discovered improv. I was living in New York for a year, and I was doing a sort of acting course, and I guess I sort of my sort of entry point into it was slightly twofold. I was doing this acting course, and it was the first time I'd done any acting courses. I basically dropped out of uni the previous year when I deciding that I wanted to be an actor, having done a lot of theatre in my first year at uni and just fallen in love with it basically. And so doing my first training when I was in New York, and there was a module. There was an improv module, and that was obviously sort of understood what improv was from Whose Line Is It Anyway? As is now you're contractually obliged to say. And yeah, this module was taught by, he's now actually quite a successful comedian. This guy called Kurt Brownholer. I don't know if you know Kurt Brownholer. He does quite a lot of stuff. He used to do this very popular night in New York called Hot Tub with Kristen Schaal. He's slightly more famous. He was went on to be in things like Mad Men and things like that. Anyway, Kurt taught this improv module, and I just thought he was so funny, and I loved it. But it was then meeting this other actor. He was actually Scottish. He was a few years older than me. We did this short film together, and he was just the funniest person I'd ever met in my life to that point. And he just had this incredible charisma and just ability to just do stuff on the fly, and take after take, he was just so funny. And I saw the director, who knew him well, was just deferring to him on so many shots, just being I was just going to let you do this thing, Patrick, or you just keep going and just do whatever. And I basically very quickly became just totally in awe of Patrick, and just wanted to be him so badly. And I think And, I was 20 at that age, very impressionable, very just eager, passionate about wanting to be an actor. And at that point, by the way, had no sort of ambition to be a comedian. Did not really. I mean, I loved comedy I'd loved comedy growing up and all of that, but I was still so far from imagining any kind of actual career in comedy. I was just so impressed by him as an actor, and in a just a sort of very cringe moment, I sort of said to him, like, probably something along the lines of like, how can I be you, or like, how can I do what you do? And he just said, go and do improv, go and learn improv. And he told me, go and take classes at UCB. And so that's exactly what I did. And I enrolled in the first 3 levels of UCB in New York. So this would have been back in 2005, or actually probably 2006, so like spring 2006, I imagine. And that was, I mean, I didn't really know that at the time, but now sort of looking back at it historically, that was like a real heyday for, I think, improv in New York at that point. Like, it was really sort of, that was at the time, I think, when it was really sort of flexing its muscles. Like, it already had quite a lot of success through people like, or starting, people like, I guess, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler were starting to become sort of household names. Was it, maybe that was like just before Parks and Rec came out, but it's probably around about the same time as, I think, Parks and Rec coming out. And anyway, lots of other just big names were coming up through the school or already had. I heard that like Aubrey Plaza was taking classes around about the same time. I imagine that Donald Glover, I think, was a similar era. My level 1 teacher was Zach Woods, although actually I think he was actually shadowing at that time. That might have been one of his very first classes that he was teaching. Because he was a teacher, I just assumed, and because he's very tall, I just assumed that he must be mid-20s at least, or that he was, significantly older than me. Turns out he's 1 year older than me, so he was 21 when he was teaching that class, which is just astonishing, isn't it?
Wild.
Yeah. He was famously very precocious, I think, and like started taking improv when he was like 16 at UCB. But yeah, anyway, so that was how I got into it, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with it straight away, and just thought it was the best thing imaginable, and still was so far from even thinking about this being like a career or anything like that. But I just knew that I loved it, and sadly, I had to go back to the UK because I was only on a 1-year student visa. Had to go back to the UK and didn't even know at the time that improv, that long form improv, I didn't know that didn't exist in the UK. So I was sort of going back to the UK, desperate to find more of that, and there wasn't any, or there was really just very, very little. I actually came back and did another year of drama school at East 15, of which there was not a sniff of improv there. And when I finished that, I was like, okay, I feel like I've got to find this improv thing. I've got to find whoever is doing improv in the UK, because I just wanted to do more of it. And so that was how I entered what I now termed like the wilderness years. Because I think for probably about 2 years or so, maybe like 2 to 3, probably like 2 to 3 years, I was just sort of going to just random kind of workshops that I could find that people were doing. I remember there was this message board. Was it the Crunchy Frog? I think it was Crunchy Frog. Do you remember Crunchy Frog? I think that's what it was called. I think this is how long ago this was. Like, there was a sort of internet message board that I think was called the Crunchy Frog Collective, and it was this, it was this very small thing where of all the people who might be interested in doing improv, and I think through there I found some like group. Basically, for like 2 to 3 years, I was sort of found a succession of these just very tiny little improv-y groups, and the improv was bad. I mean, it just wasn't at all recognizable from what I had been doing. There was at that time already a lot of just sort of what I think now is a bit more. Certainly, I feel I understand a bit better, and I mean we could probably come back to this, but this idea of the sort of cross fertilization of improv from the different ethoses, the different philosophies, that gives rise to a lot of tribalism that you see everywhere in improv. And at that time, what little sort of long form improv there was very much of the sort of Keith Johnston variety. I think that was like slightly more popular. I think largely because that style of improv has for longer, especially in this side of the world, been used as a more accessible tool in drama schools. So in drama schools or wherever else you might be learning drama, you're more likely to come across, I think, Keith Johnston's style improv because it's more it's more sort of analogous. It's more like aligned to other types of drama training. You know, it's more focused on narrative and using improv as a tool to create drama, to create narrative, rather than where I think the sort of Chicago, the America, that the sort of the US long form, Chicago long form, whatever you want to call it, that school of thought feels to me more focused on improv for improv's sake. In other words, how do we use improv to, how do we really use improv to explore like the fully improvised nature of what a show can be for an audience. So yeah, so there was a lot of that. There was a lot of finding these different sort of things, and I was like, what is this? And also crucially, it was just like for the most part everyone there was just quite bad, or you know, it was not their fault, just no one was being sort of taught properly really. And they were all just in these, you know, tiny little rooms above primary schools or tiny little rooms above pubs. Not that that's changed much, but but we're talking even smaller, even more dreary rooms above even drearier pubs, and literally doing shows to 3 people. Again, maybe that's not changed that much, but you know, but I'm talking 3, not 13. But yeah, and it was just, and I kind of really toughed it out, and I think I was probably getting ready. Honestly, I think I was probably getting ready to knock it on the head, and just be like, I think I'm done with this. I'm not really finding what I want from this. And at one of those dreadful groups, I met Amy Cook-Hodgson from Austentatious. She and I sort of hit it off. I immediately thought Amy was like really funny and good. And I suspect, I guess maybe she felt the same, because she said, oh, like I'm trying to start up this new group with some friends of mine from Oxford, and I think you'd be really great for it. Do you want to come along and meet them? And those people were what then became Austentatious. So those Oxford friends of Amy were Rachel, Andy and Joe. And then me and Cariad were invited to sort of make up the initial 6. And that was Austentatious. And then off the sort of success of Austentatious.
How did Austentatious build into such a big success?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's one I think about a lot. I think it's one we all in that group think about a lot. I think there's a number of different factors at play there, and I think that they all are significant and contribute to what I now just sort of see as a bit of a lightning in a bottle sort of moment. I think one huge factor was the Jane Austen sort of like effect, which none of us really knew before we started it. And then when we started, we were like, oh shit, people really love Jane Austen. Like we didn't realize that that this thing would actually be simultaneously be tapping into two sort of subcultures. I mean, not that Jane Austen is a subculture, but I would say that the sort of that Austenian fandom is its own kind of subculture for sure, and improv, and that was totally accidental. The only reason for Jane Austen was because the other guys were just a bunch of literature nerds. They'd all done English at Oxford. Joe and Andy had done dissertations, I think, in Jane Austen. They were just, big fucking nerds. I famously had not read any Jane Austen. When they said they wanted to do a Jane Austen show, I was like, yeah, I fucking love Jane Austen. Love her. I love her films. And I basically lied just because having done a rehearsal or two with these guys, I was like, oh, these guys are really funny. I want to do more stuff with them. And so I basically lied just so I could stay in the group, and obviously fully resolving to eventually read some Jane Austen. And I think as the sort of history of that team will tell it, I think I went about 6 months of doing the show without having read a word of Jane Austen. I don't know if that's strictly true, but it certainly was quite a long time. And I eventually read some of the books, and I was like, oh, I think I understand the show now. Anyway, so the Austen thing was one thing, and the other thing was the fact that improv at the time was still a magic trick. Showstopper existed at that time, but I think was still very young itself. And us and Showstopper were sort of I feel like pretty much the only gigs in town. Maybe apologies to any UK improv historians listening. I know that's not strictly true, but I mean in the sense of, after say our first flash of success, it was definitely, I think, those two shows that felt like they were leading the charge. But there were when we went up to do our first Edinburgh with Austentatious, I mean, I think there were probably 5 improv shows in the whole program. And I really don't think that's an exaggeration. And also, most of those other shows would have been short form, like Improverts, long running Edinburgh show, short form show. So there would have been maybe a handful of short form shows. I don't know if there was any other long form shows really happening, certainly narrative. And so it just was, people just thought it was a magic trick. And that I think went so far to, I think that accounted for so much of the initial sort of amazement at the show. Because, I mean, I'm telling you now, so many of those early shows just would have been bad. Would have been bad. I mean, they would have been funny, I'm sure, but they would have been bad. They the improv in them, I'm sure, would have been bad, but good enough, I think, to sort of make an impression. And I think the other thing, honestly, the other sort of major factor was just chemistry. And by chemistry, I mean how sexy we all were and how much we would get off with each other in every single show. No, just the comedy chemistry, I think, just was really, really on point. And I did feel very lucky. I think that, particularly in the early days of that show, I often felt a little blown away by some of those guys. I mean, all of them really, but they were just some of the funniest people I'd ever met, and I was just sort of in awe of how funny they were. And obviously now I don't feel that way about them at all. But yeah, so those 3 things I think were just fairly unique. And people often ask me, or I tell them unprompted, whether I think that, the success of something like Austentatious could be replicated. And in all honesty, and I don't want this to sound too bleak. I don't know if it can, because I just think I'm sure shows. Actually, maybe that's too bleak. Maybe I don't agree with that at all. I mean, to be honest, there have been lots of other shows that have gone on to achieve a similar level of, say, touring. I mean, Murder She Didn't Write is now, I believe, in the West End, I think, and touring, and that's obviously a very similar style of show, which started after Austentatious. And there have been, and obviously and Cool Story Bro, which I've just been touring with, which has had a phenomenal first tour and performed at the Soho Theatre, which was so exciting, and what an amazing opportunity for that kind of improv. So actually, I'm sure other improv shows can achieve that level of success. I just think it's hard, and I think now shows need to rely on very different factors. I think a show like Cool Story Bro, for example, the reason that's been able to achieve such a rapid level of success is because of Kiell's profile, and but that shouldn't be apologized for. I think it's amazing that someone with Kiell's profile loves improv so much. That's, to me, is the dream. So it's so, I think it's fantastic that people like Kiell and Ambica still want to do improv shows. And that is just something that just didn't really happen even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, really even maybe 3 years ago. So all those signs are really good and healthy and pointing in a really good direction, I think. Yeah.
And when did the FA come into it? The Free Association in London, which you are one of the co-founders.
Yeah. So the reason for the FA started, it's difficult to talk about the FA without talking about what I guess very much it was the sort of precursor to it in some ways, which was Monkey Toast. So obviously there was Hoopla, it was also around at that time, and they were teaching. If I'm honest, I wasn't hugely knowledgeable about what they were teaching at Hoopla at that time. But Monkey Toast started, which was a sort of, this Canadian guy, David Shaw, was in London. He was an improviser from Toronto, and he'd started teaching long form improv classes, the type of long form that I think hadn't been readily available. So that kind of Chicago American style long form, just to differentiate, different, for example, to say narrative long form, which is obviously what we were doing in Austentatious, and what Showstoppers were sort of also doing in a musical form. So yeah, so I guess what I mean by this type of long form is really sort of formats that are built around effectively sort of sketch based improv. So whether it's organic or it's premise, they are shows like a Harold, like an Armando, like a Slacker, that are sort of effectively, scenes, comedic scenes knitted together in some format or another, but not strictly cohering into a narrative. And everyone will be talking about Monkey Toast, and I basically wanted to get involved in Monkey Toast because they also had a show, and lots of good people were doing the show. And I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to do the classes, but I wanted to do the show. So David, I knew, was a big fan of Austentatious. Several of the cast members like Joe, Cariad, were already teaching at Monkey Toast and doing that show. And so I wanted in, and I got to know David, and David was like, well, come and take a class. I think you can start at I don't know what it was. Maybe he let me start at level 2 or 3 or something. And I think maybe 3. I think maybe I ended up doing 2 classes there, maybe 3 and 4. Anyway, it was nice. It was good. It was great that lots of people were so excited about it. The classes were really growing, but again, from what I knew and what I was aware of existed at like UCB, there was just something that wasn't sort of like clicking with me in terms of what the training that was on offer. And no, this is no sort of direct shade on David, but I think, you know, like several people I think had started to maybe take a bit of issue with, say, his teaching style. And I guess like that point beside, I just sort of started to feel a kind of hunger for like, I think there needs to be something else. I think there needs to be another perspective on this. And didn't really know what that was going to be, but Max and Ivan are a sort of quite legendary sort of sketch double act, comedy double act. And Ivan had been in one of my classes at Monkey Toast, and we got on really well when we were playing together. And I met with Max and Ivan one afternoon, and we just got to talking and basically decided to start a new improv group. There wasn't really much talk at the time about doing classes, but I think it was sort of in the air, in the thinking that maybe at one point we would sort of start to do that. But first and foremost, the aim was just to start a new group and for it to be a bit of a sort of like super group type thing and just start doing shows and running like a regular night. So we started that, and then very soon after that, before we'd even had the first show, I was doing Edinburgh that summer, and I met Mike O.T., Mike Orton-Tolliver, and we were actually doing this like random puppet musical show together that Amy Cook-Hodgson had sort of set up. And me and Mike met doing that. We really hit it off. And Mike was obviously a very experienced American improviser. And when talking to Mike, I realized that he was probably the missing piece of this puzzle. And I was like, I think with you, we could really like elevate this. I think with your like experience and your, you know, we basically shared the same ambitions for what London Improv was missing. And so I desperately wanted to bring Mike on board, and he was very keen, and that was that really. So Mike sort of came on board initially as coach, but then very quickly the classes started. We started classes, maybe we had our first show in September. No, was it October? We just had the 10th anniversary. So
October. Yeah.
Was it October? Yeah. So we had our first show in October in 2015, right? No, 2014. Sorry, it's 2025 now. In 2014. And we started classes in January 2015. And they became immediately very, very successful very quickly, largely because of having Mike on board and also Jim Woods. So like Jim, who was at Boom at the time, Mike basically brought Jim over like very quickly and was like, Jim's the guy, like we need Jim over here, like teaching workshops and stuff. So Mike brought Jim over, and I think with the influence of those two, the school became very popular very quickly. And basically at around the same time, Max and Ivan just were like, I'm not sure we want to, like, they were very busy at the time with all their comedy stuff, and it was very quickly becoming a business. So they basically decided to sort of step back because they didn't really have the bandwidth to run a business. And so me and Mike were the initial sort of two directors when we first made it a company. And then maybe about like 6 months to a year later, Johnny and Ryan effectively bought into the company because we were doing classes and shows at the De Beauvoir, then called the Cog Art Space. And Johnny, canny individual that he is, basically saw that the improv comedy, everything we were doing was so much more popular than his attempts to run a sort of fringe theatre doing drama and plays. And he just decided he wanted in. And so Johnny and his partner Ryan folded their companies basically into ours and made the Free Association. And then a few years later, Mike left, and we don't talk about that anymore. No, me and Mike are on Me and Mike are on good terms now, but yeah.
What is it about improv that has led you to invest so much of your life into it?
Such a great question, and a particularly poignant one as well, because I'm going to share too much now, but I had therapy this morning, and I actually recently, I don't know if I can share this, but I'm just going to anyway. I recently did some MDMA therapy, which was really, really amazing. For anyone who doesn't know, it's like, a therapist, a licensed therapist comes around, feeds you a large dose of MDMA at 11 in the morning on a Monday, and then sits with you for 6 hours whilst you are very high and in a deeply sort of compassionate, empathetic state. And basically you do a 6-hour therapy session whilst you're in this very open, vulnerable state. And it's really amazing. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that, like, one of the big sort of light bulb moments that came from that session, and I had what's called the reintegration session with my therapist this morning, where she's basically like reading back a lot of the things I said to me, and we're discussing it. One of the big sort of light bulb moments for me was around improv, and how the place it has in my life, and the things that I still have yet to learn on a really, or like take from it on like a deep granular level, or rather what I should say, the things that I have learned from improv, but I in my day-to-day life often don't give enough credit to it for that. And if we can be more conscious of it, you can take even more from it. So one of, I think, the reasons why I fell in love with improv initially, and I don't know if I was fully conscious of it at the time, but it was one of the first and only things that I found could go some way to like combating my nerves. So since I was young, I suffered hugely from nerves, and developed a stutter. Sorry, it doesn't always come out, and I think it. Those who know me know this won't come as much of a surprise. Anyone who's ever been taught by me knows that I can stutter quite a lot in class, and yeah. So I used to suffer I used to suffer from this stutter and from nerves. I used to have like crippling nerves. I would shake a lot, and it was really bad. But for some reason, I wanted to be an actor, which those two things are just not really compatible. And I noticed very early on that like doing improv seemed to bypass this in some way, and I couldn't really understand it. I noticed that I basically never stuttered when I was improvising, even in class. And I think on a sort of slightly unconscious level, that just really sort of like touched something in me and made me aware that, oh, this is really important to me. This is really, really good. This is really, really good for me. And so I think, and so I have, I've told a number of people that I think that improv was one of the big things that helped with my stutter. And I think more than, and I've tried to think a lot about like what sort of why that is, and what's the sort of tangible thing that you could take from that if you could sort of hold on to it, you could apply to a lot of your other life. And I don't really know the answer to that, but like, sorry, I'll just sort of segue into this other little sort of like golden nugget, as my therapist would say, from this session, which was I've had a lot of like issues around communication. Again, anyone who knows me knows that I'm a terrible communicator on text message, email, or basically any other medium. And I started to learn and discover about myself that I think those things are very connected. The stutter and my nerves and my issues with communication, I think all boil down to fear. I've had this sort of like deep-rooted fear of of communicating. And yeah, this fear of saying the wrong thing, this fear of this like desperate need to want to not be misinterpreted, to be clear and to use the right words and all of that stuff. And that fear is not something that I've ever been fully able to conquer. But improv is like the art form of fear. It is this art form that is like built on foundations of fear. Like, for good reason, it is most normal people's worst nightmare, because the idea of getting up and in front of a room full of strangers saying things that are unprepared is most people's idea of hell. That is their absolute worst nightmare, because that fear that I've just been describing is like so prominent, intellectually is so prominent. Like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I fuck it up? Like, what if I embarrass myself? What if I humiliate myself with what I say? And as we know from doing improv, the skills and the techniques of improv are a just truly magical way of bypassing that fear and allowing you to exist in this space on stage. If you can do it well, I guess, if you can listen to your teachers and do all the things you need to do of like bypassing that fear. And when you can, the results, as anyone who has done a lot of improv will attest, are just magical. And those results lead on to more results and more like lessons, more sort of amazing things that you can learn, which are like, goes beyond just simply marshalling fear. You then sort of learn that like, oh, this isn't just about like overcoming a defense. Like, actually, you realize when you're in this place, you're at your like absolute like peak. Like, you suddenly enter into this place of being purely present, this place of flow where you are just operating, just sort of like at your peak. That sense of just being fully alive in the moment, of sharing moment to moment with your scene partners is truly just, it's life-changing and life-affirming. It will change your life and then affirm that life that you found through the change. So I think like that, I'll share something anecdotally with you, which is maybe a much more succinct way to put all that stuff I just said. Nothing gives me the greatest pleasure I've known in my life since starting the FA has been when people come up to me, either if they know who I am and that I founded the FA, or when they discover that I founded the FA, when they say to me, oh, like I took classes there and like it changed my life. And that has happened a not insignificant number of times. I'm very, very pleased to say, at the 10th birthday celebrations last year, it was very emotional for me for a number of reasons, but I was at my sort of like most emotional when several people over the course of the evening in very earnest ways, being quite emotional themselves, would pull me aside and just say like, I mean, it's making me quite emotional now just thinking about it, but like, you would say like, I just want you to know how much this place has meant to me. This place has literally changed my life, and I'm just so grateful. And that means so much to me, because I get to experience again what improv did for me, and that is why I just have continued to invest so much in it, because it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. And if I can, through any way, continue to give that back to people, then that's just the greatest feeling. And I love it. Mm.
How then does improv fit into your other creative pursuits or careers?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's it is amazing to think about. Like, for all of the, tender, earnest things I've just said about improv, I will also offer the counter view to that by saying that, like, over the past decade of running the FA has been incredibly taxing for me, and it's been very stressful. And at so many points over that 10 years, I have wondered whether the sacrifice is worth it, because over that 10 years, it's felt like a lot of my other career ambitions have at one point or another taken a bit of a back seat, whether that's explicitly or just in the sense of just the bandwidth that I'm able to offer to those other things. And so there have been many times where I've even been quite resentful towards improv and the FA, particularly in those moments where it feels like we are just running to standstill. And there have been many of those moments. I am not a natural business owner. There are so many skills which I have lacked that would have been so valuable to have in running a business. I've been such an accidental business owner, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe a lot of business owners are, but it doesn't make it any less stressful when it feels like you make decisions, you make choices, and they either don't work as well as you hoped, or they don't work at all, and you waste money, and people get pissed off with you, and it feels like you are. Yeah, it feels like there have been so many times where it feels I and we, Johnny and Ryan, Mike, at times we're all running to a standstill. And so, yeah, like thankfully the positives have always outweighed the negatives there, I think, on balance and in the long run. But the reason I was saying that was because you asked me how has improv affected the other aspects of my career. So in the times when I've been like resentful to, say, running an improv theatre, when it's affected, say, my acting career or my writing career, I then also have to look back and realize that almost all of the opportunities I have had in my career have in some way come from improv. So, like, I wouldn't have got my last agent that I was with, a PBJ for about 7-8 years. I wouldn't have got them if not for Austentatious. So many. I've been writing a film with two sort of partners of mine who are both improvisers, and that film got commissioned the original short that the commission for that film was eventually based on was entirely improvised. Those collaborators, friends of mine, are improvisers. So, there isn't a single part of my career, of my other artistic endeavors, that improv hasn't touched. And the lessons that I take from improv, I, take into every single job. I mean, I was just doing a filming job, very exciting filming job. I was so thrilled it was a really, really fun job to do. And I got to do scenes with Toni Collette, which was really fun, very exciting, because, I think that she's extraordinary. I think she's just such an unbelievable actor who I've watched and admired my entire life. And so the prospect of like doing scenes with Toni Collette was huge for me. And the director was someone who's seen my work a lot, and she was a big fan of me as like a comedian and as an improviser. And I was very, very lucky. Her name was Rain, amazing woman. I was very, very lucky that she like trusted and encouraged me to improvise liberally throughout this film. And it meant that like these scenes that I got to do with Toni, we had so much fun. And I think that she really sort of responded to how, because I think she just really responded to how, to the the playful spirit that I brought to that scene through improv. And I think it was a real, I mean, she said as much afterwards. She was like, I never get to do that. Like, and she genuinely seemed like it was a real thrill for her to just sort of improvise that liberally on film. So that was really special to sort of have that moment with her. And, you know, in anything I write with a lot of collaborators, and I'm always using improv as a tool. I mean, because they're the same tool, basically. Like, you know, when you learn to improvise, you're learning to write. And that's another one of the amazing things about improv. I mean, there's a lot more to writing that you also need to know, but you're learning, it's a very good tool, I think, basically, especially once you learn game and you understand comedy, and you understand how the games of scenes work, and then you can just pitch and pitch. You know, I'm talking about when you're in a scene or when you're in a room, it gives you the tools, the freedom and the fearlessness to pitch. Yeah.
Sometimes you see people, they've maybe done improv for a while and they just seem to have something that whatever they say, it's funny. And, you know, I watch them like, if I had said that, just wouldn't have been funny. But for some reason, some people seem to have this thing that just makes them very funny. What is that?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I guess. And it's why I think clowning is such a sort of... It's why I think clowning is so good and so interesting, and why I think the collaborative space between say clowning and improv is so fertile. And I think people who understand that are brilliant performers in both disciplines. And, you know, I love clowning. I sort of did my first clowning courses, probably now about 10 years ago. I did these courses with Mick Barnfather that I just adored. And I also fully appreciate that clowning is terrifying for so many people, and I also fully appreciate that not everyone gets on board with clowning. And it's not that I think that all improvisers have to go out and do a clowning course, but I raise it as but I think that there is something just so valuable in what clowning is teaching you that improvisers do need to learn. So however you find that is sort of up to you. And I think doing, say, clowning courses is one way to do it, but also just doing tons of shows and just being really disciplined about what you're learning about yourself is another way to do it. But ultimately, I do just think everyone just needs to find out what it is about them that is funny. This is something that improv does not necessarily teach you. And as in, I would say there are very few that I've seen, like specifically improv syllabuses that are geared towards or that leave space for finding out what is funny about the individual. Because it's so much about teamwork, it's so much about the scene, it's so much about collaboration, and that is wonderful, and it's so important. But I really fully believe that for performers to get to that next level, they also really need to have an understanding. Like I don't think anyone has like a perfect understanding of themselves and their comedic instrument. But the more that you can shine a light on yourself and what that is, and the more you can get closer to understanding, even just little nuggets, you just need little things. It can be so simple. It can just be like, that like particular character voice that I do, I seem to be able to do very well. And that can just be one of my, most comedic performers have like 3 or 4 voices. Like I would say even like the most impressive character comedians maybe have like 10 that you could reasonably say are actual individual, like distinct characters. Most characters are just a rehashing of another like type that you do with a slight variation. So if you think about that in improv terms, like how many shows, if you do improv a lot, like how many shows and how many scenes that is that you're doing, like no one is asking you in improv to come up with a brand new, completely distinct comedic character in every single scene. It's simply not possible. Like you have to rely on your tools. You have to know what you do well. Like I have like 4 characters. I have 4 characters tops. I've been doing Austentatious for 13 years. I've done over 600 shows easily of Austentatious at this point. I have 4 characters. Okay. That are in regular rotation. I have an old man. I have a simpleton, and that's fine. Like I have slightly different ways of doing my old man, but I know that my old man works, and I know that my old man is like good, and crucially that I enjoy doing it. Like that, I think is so crucial. You've got to find those things that you like doing that like make you laugh first and foremost. That often gets, I think, maybe overlooked. Like I know we're not supposed to laugh in improv, and I think most English improvisers really need, myself included, really need to learn to laugh less on stage because it's embarrassing. But internally, you need to make yourself laugh. Internally, you need to be thinking of, you need to have those tools, those little go-tos that make you laugh. Because I think the real skill is actually learning how to adapt those tools, how to bury them, how to make them feel like surprising, and how to marry them to the other arts and techniques of good improv. That's not to say that, like, don't get me wrong, the goal is still to be surprising. Like, I still try to tell myself before every show, like, try and do something you haven't done before. Like, try and surprise yourself in some way. But like, it's like when you've done like, over 1,000 shows, it's really hard to like really genuinely surprise yourself. I mean, I'll still do it every now and then, but like, I think there's no shame in understanding that, like, okay, so in improv, you are functionally making things up every single time you step on stage. But the one thing that is constant every time you go on stage is you. Like, you are the instrument that you are bringing on stage. And what I'm talking about is tuning your instrument, like understanding how you play your own comedy instrument, which is you. And there's nothing wrong with being aware of that, having that awareness when you go into an improv scene. And I would say, actually, to get to that next level, it's a necessity, But how each person finds what it is, it's too specific. I mean, if I could give, it's too specific for each person. But like, the one thing the note I often give in classes to more advanced students is like, you've got to listen to the laughs. You've got to listen to the laughs in a show, and you've got to bank where those laughs are, not just for that scene or for that show in terms of a callback, but also for you, for the next show. Like, if you're getting laughs for something, like you need to be doing the extra step of like, oh wow, like in that show I got like a huge laugh when I did this thing. I've never got that laugh before. Like, what was it about that was so funny that I did? Like, And I'm not saying like come up with a, I'm not saying make a catchphrase and do your catchphrase in every show, but it's about understanding what the quality of that thing was and where that comes from in you. Yeah.
You run a workshop called Mischief in improv. What does mischief mean?
Yeah. Well, to me, and again, this is where I think there's a bit of a crossover in clowning for me, and it's sort of where that came from and why I wanted to do that workshop originally, and why I think it's so important for improv, because you learn a lot of rules in improv. You learn a lot of like techniques and disciplines and formats. So everyone who's ever done more than like two improv courses will know that like the 90% of the battle is trying to be present whilst also trying to remember all the stuff that you're being taught and all these like things that you're supposed to be being taught. And I think it's really important to get that baseline of fundamentals. It's really important, but you've got to get it. You've got to do it enough so it's just there and you never have to think about it. And then the next step for me is remembering that when you are doing a show in front of a paying audience, that you're doing a show in front of a paying audience, and that audience is here to see a comedy show. And I think the idea of Mischief is just very simple, which is just that like there is just so much comedy comes from the delight in fucking things up, in getting things wrong. And even more than that, like improv is specifically designed, like the only reason any audience comes to an improv show is because they think you're going to get it wrong. And that is as true in short form as it is in long form. And I think a lot of people who like study and get very nerdy about long form, I think forget that. They forget that whilst they're trying so hard to get the thing so right, they forget that actually most of the time, I would say all the time, in at least some part of the audience's brain, they want to see this go wrong, because the implication is always, whenever you say this is made up, the implication is always in that from the audience, no way. There's no way they can make this up. There's no way they're going to make this up without getting it wrong. And they're hardwired for those mistakes. They want to see them. And so I think it's our duty as improvisers to, at the very least, just be aware of that implication. And now there's ways in which you see that happening in different improv shows. Obviously, a short form show is literally designed to engineer those mistakes. Like the games are designed to be especially difficult or impossible, so that the mistakes come quicker. There are more traps, more opportunities for the performers to fall into them. And I think in long form you see a lot of like what are typically referred to as quite hack moves. This phrase pimping that has been used for many years. You will see players adopting those sorts of what are I say quite ungenerously referred to as like short form tactics. Like they're quite snootily referred to as like short form gaggy tactics. But to me, the essence of that move stems from what is very pure about the contract that improvisers have with an audience, which is they want to see you fuck this up. And so what I try to teach in that workshop, and something I feel very passionately about, is trying to do that well. Because I hate as much as the next improviser those hack pimp moves that you see loads of people do, which is do recite your poem for us, Alfred. I don't know that verse in the Bible. Won't you read it to me? You know, that sort of really hacky, throwing each other under the bus. Like I loathe that as much as the next improviser. when it's done in that hack way. But the gold to me is finding ways to do that is not hack. So finding ways to subvert, disrupt, throw your partners under the bus, find those moments of mischief within the thing that still feel original and still crucially, this is the tricky bit, that still crucially feel like embedded in the reality of the scene. I will go one step further though and say that, like, if you're really, like, I'm a big fan, I don't want Alex Holland to hear me saying this, but I think if you're a really experienced, I think if you're a very experienced improviser and you really want to push the boat out, like, and you're practiced enough and you're experienced enough at this, like, there is definitely the next stage to that is finding ways to even tear down the artifice of what the actual improv show is. So, you know, there are ways to where you could be very mischievous with like very like meta moves that are undoubtedly ungrounded, because by their very nature they will be disrupting even if just for a moment, disrupting the reality of what you're seeing in the scene. I think you've got to be very experienced to sort of get away with those, and you've got to know what you're doing. I guess you've got to know that, like, you've got to know what you're doing when you do that and be ready to get back on track. And you've got to be playing with people who you trust enough to do that. I mean, a team that they're just one of my favorite improv teams in the world, Cook County Social Club, Chicago team, with formerly Tim Robinson used to be in them. Greg Hess, long-time, very, very good friend of mine and long-time friend of the FA, is in that team. And I just think that they are just sensationally good. And they have this kind of Looney Tunes style mischief with each other, which I think only works because they are so good. And they're so good because they're such good actors. They're such good actors and they're so committed that they can be wacky, mischievous, tear a hole in the fabric of the reality of the scene, but then in the very next move be utterly committed to whatever this new sort of reality is. So they're so accomplished in that way that they can have their cake and eat it too. They can do great scenes, but they can also show to the audience. Like, we know that this is all just dumb. Like, we know this is all just dumb, and we're here to just have fun, and we're just gonna like really just show you the insides of our wacky creative minds, and it's gonna make a kind of like surreal kind of sense if you just kind of go with it. But in lesser hands, it doesn't work. So, you know, I say that kind of stuff with caution, but I firmly believe that like mischief is a good, healthy sense of mischief is just so important to have in improv, and crucially, just not to be so reverent with improv, because no one is coming to an improv. No one is coming to a comedy show to see reverence, and so, you know, that. Like, that's why, like, people will always like adore the sillier show over the like incredibly tight formatted show. You know, obviously, if you get to have both, that's the dream. But I think for me, silliness is always king, and it's always king.
Where do you see improv in London going in the next 5 years?
I think it's in a really healthy place. I think there are so many great indie teams around, so many great indie like nights around. I think it's really exciting. I think that the emergence of some of these bigger shows like Cool Story Bro playing on these big stages and doing these big tours will be so healthy for improv in the longer run. And what I really hope is that it like starts to attract more people from different corners. So I think the outlook is good. I'm very excited about the prospect of our new venue. You know, at long last, we are We are moments away from opening the doors to our brand new, purpose-built free association theatre, which has been the dream since day one. And it's so exciting that after 11 years and countless heartbreaks that it's so close. And I think obviously there are already improv theatres on the map, like the FA has been, like Hoopla has been. It's not new to have an improv theatre, but I think for us and our community, I think we can do something really special with this new theatre, and that's certainly how I want to steer the business. I want this to be I do want it to be seen as like a landmark moment for improv, and another really significant step along the road for improv being taken really, really seriously as a comedic art form in this country in a way that it has struggled a lot to be in the last 10 years. I think a big part of that also just needs to come from performers. I think performers need to feel restless. I think too many performers are resting on their laurels. And I think I would just love to see more performers and more teams being braver with the shows they're doing, and really, really risking pushing the boat out, and really, really trying to like push improv into interesting new places. And I think that has to come from a style of play, not just a format. I think too often teams are like, we're doing a new show, and it's basically just an Armando, but with, I don't know, they'll interview a gardener, and all the scenes are about plants, and I'm like, well, that's not. I don't care. It's not a new show. It's so I really do think it needs to come from like a style of play. I think what the US still has that we don't have enough of is the US still has generations of talent where the people at the forefront have been doing that for years and passing that down. And so I think it's really important for especially the most experienced people in this country to be just so humble about their level of improv, and to recognize that like, you are so far from, and I'm talking about myself in this as well, you are so far from how good you actually can be. And that there is always somewhere further you can push this, and you can always get better and better. And I think it's so important for the people who are doing those big shows to not rest on their laurels, and to be the inspiration for successive generations. Like, I want the students who are coming up through the FA and through Hoopla and wherever else to be seeing shows like small indie shows by experienced players and having their minds blown. And just having their minds blown at like, fuck, I have not seen anyone do that before. Like, that needs to be the aim. That needs to be the aim. And anyone who's had those transient moments of genius, either doing or witnessing, know that it's possible. Know that gold is out there, and that needs to be the aim. Like adequate can't be the aim, and also like being in the best show in the UK should not be the aim. Being the best show in the world should be the aim. And so yeah, it's a call to arms, especially to any very experienced improvisers listening. Like, you're not good enough. Like, you all just everyone just needs to push it, like to be braver, be riskier, be more inventive with everything that they're doing on stage. That's not. I will immediately caveat that by saying there are amazing players in this country who I love watching, love playing with, but that's just, I would just want that to be more of like a call to arms, Yeah.
What do you do when you want to switch off from improv and all your other creative pursuits?
Yeah, I guess I listen to The Rest Is History. Yeah, I guess there's lots I do. I mean, I'm I'm a big sort of like film buff, film fan. Like I watch a lot of movies, I read a lot, I go ice skating. Yeah, I guess at this stage I find it easy enough to switch off from improv. But yeah, I guess I don't. I mean, I definitely go through periods where I feel like I'm doing too much improv. And I totally appreciate what a privileged thing that is to say to a lot of people who feel like they can't get in enough shows. So I apologize immediately for that comment. But to be honest, I rarely, I know this is such a lame, nerdy thing to say, but like, I rarely feel like I need to switch off from improv. Like, I'm never bored of doing it, love teaching it. And I actually have a really high tolerance for watching even like student level stuff, which I know a lot of people maybe at my experience level don't share, but like I actually really do. I love going to watch class shows and just seeing people, just seeing people's minds work even in their like first steps in improv. So I know that's like a really earnest and like lame thing to say, but I just genuinely don't really feel the need to switch off from it that often.
And I think on that note, thank you so much, Graham Dickson.
Thank you so much for having me on, Aaron. What a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Shiny Things podcast. Don't forget to head over to shinythingscomedy.com for loads more improv-related posts, where you can sign up to our newsletter so you get all of our new content straight to your inbox. Until next time, I've been Aaron Balaction. Happy improving.